Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Agile Talks. As you know, this Agile Talks series, we discuss all things about Agile and learn from industry experts their experience and how they implement Agile practices in their organizations. For this episode, we have Tarminder Singh. Tarminder has extensive experience working as a consultant who specializes in areas such as business transformation, project management, change management, and strategy consulting. So, welcome, Tarminder. Really glad to have you here today.
Hi, Jeremy. Glad to be
Hi.
here.
Yeah. So before we start with some of the discussion points that I've prepared, could you briefly introduce yourself and maybe tell the audience, share about your career experience and things like that?
Okay, so hi everyone. Hope all of you are doing well. So just maybe briefly introducing myself. I think Jeremy touched a bit upon it. So I shall expand on it. So my name is Tarminder. I started off surprisingly in the area of business. So my undergraduate was in Bachelor's of Accounting and Finance, and subsequently I pursued the CIMA qualification, which is the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, right? But I think about 3 to 4 years in, I realized that accounting is not really my cup of tea, right? And I wanted to explore more in terms of a holistic overview of businesses, of how they run, how their operations are, the type of strategies they are in place, and so on. So that's where I then ventured into project management, right? So in terms of academic credentials, I'm a Prince 2 certified project manager and a Prince 2 certified Agile project manager, as well as completed my MBA, right? Um, Career-wise, like what Jeremy touched upon, my expertise mainly is in project management, program management, strategy, business transformation, etc. I've over 10, 11 years of working experience, and I've been very fortunate and blessed to have worked for a lot of credible companies. So I've been as an external consultant with KPMG, Ernst& Young. I also have been an internal consultant meaning in like the internal business strategy teams
Mhm.
of IMU, International Medical University, AirAsia, right? And currently I find myself working as a project manager under the CEO's office of Pembangunan Leasing Corporation, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Bank Pembangunan, which is Malaysia's developmental bank, right? So I have quite a rich experience of running projects, both transformation, compliance, as well as a little bit on operations projects, right? So happy to share some of my experiences shortly.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tarminder. So you did mention that currently you are the project manager with BPMB, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So could you maybe share some of the responsibilities and the tasks involved in your current role?
Okay, so maybe before that, let's give a bit of context about BPMB, right? So
Mm.
they have been around for this year is our 50th anniversary, right? So we have been around for 50 years, right? And currently we are preparing into more of digitalization, digital transformation, right?
Mhm.
So most of my projects revolve around that team of digital
Mhm.
and IT, right? So I oversee the rollout of the RPA, robotics process automation, right? The replacement of our core banking system because we
Mhm.
want it to be more flexible, more scalable, etc. Right? As well as certain operational initiatives, such as policy reviews, process reviews, etc. Right? And of course, I report directly to the CEO, being under the CEO office.
Mm.
Right? So, so I think it's quite an exciting journey because BPMB has been around for so many years, right? And we have supported the nation in a lot of infrastructure projects, highways,
Yep.
tolls, etc. Right? So now it's basically trying to leap forward, right? And we can only continue servicing the nation if we are also very digital enabled.
Mm. Okay. And you mentioned that like currently one of the project that you have is to roll out like RPA, right? Robotic process automation. So how do you manage that kind of project? Is it still using like Prince 2 or agile methodologies or anything like that? If you could share.
Yeah. So maybe before that, just to give some context, so like Prince 2
Mm.
or even PMP, right?
Yeah.
They are certifications governed by different bodies, right? The knowledge, or if you are, I would say, certified in either of those certificates, right? It helps you in terms of absorbing the knowledge, the tools, templates, and so on. From there is basically tailoring to the culture of the organization. Like for
Mm.
instance, I'm Prince too, right? But
Mm.
most companies in Malaysia tend to adhere to PMP,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of like a blend, right? So of course we have to follow the directive if let's say it's mainly PMP oriented, but I do instill certain Prince 2 ingredients in there, right? So if you talk
Mm.
about RPA, we followed more of an agile approach, right? So
Mhm.
basically we automated 4 reports under the finance function, right?
Mm.
Uh, if we were to use a traditional project management approach, which is a waterfall approach,
Yeah.
we would get all the 4 at end of 3 months or 6 months, whatever the time period, right? You won't be able to see that incremental release or deployment,
Mm.
right? But for this particular initiatives, we followed the agile approach. So we did it by reports, meaning by phases, right? So
Mm.
maybe first month is report 1. Once that go live, then we go report 2, report 3, and so on, right? So it was successfully completed, right? Within the original timeline mandated, right?
Mm.
I think that approach is very beneficial because number one, it's a bit less burdensome on the users, right? Because imagine if, let's say, you were to run a business requirement workshop for all the 4 reports, right? It might take 1 whole week or 2 whole weeks, for instance, right? To
Yeah.
gather the requirements, clarifications, map out the process flows, and so on, right? And what that would mean is you are basically pulling away the user from their daily operational work for 2 weeks, right? 2 consecutive weeks, as an example. But if we do an agile or phase approach, right, you get to stagger that, right? So maybe for the first report, he or she is only needs to be away for 3 days, right? And then okay, the vendor goes about to do their configuration, the testing and so on, right? And the user can concentrate back on their daily reporting or daily operational needs, right? So
Mm.
that's beneficial because it's less burdensome on the user, number one, right? And number two is it allows for early intervention should there be an underestimate of the effort required.
Mm.
So typically in a traditional project management approach, we plan the timeline at the start. So let's say 6 months, right? And maybe only in month 4 we realize that okay, we may have underestimated certain areas and we need to re-baseline the timeline or seek an extension of time. But with Agile, right, that happens earlier on should there be any underestimation of timeline. And the other advantage is the business or the company would already have so-called enjoyed some of the benefits of the project, right? So in traditional approach, you wait 6 months. In month 4, you realize that okay, there's an underestimation. We extend by another 2 months, right? At month 4, the company doesn't get any benefit. No reports has been automated yet, right?
Yeah.
But with Agile, maybe at month 4, 2 or 3 of the reports has already been deployed. So there's already the company gets to enjoy the benefits upfront.
Mm. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that like the agile approach basically allows your company to realize the value as soon as possible for the end user, right?
Yes,
And then
correct.
in case if there's anything that doesn't match with their requirements, they can actually give you the feedback, and then you can work on it and then deliver again another solution.
Yep, correct.
That's nice. And maybe let's take a step back because I also just want to learn or understand how do you actually learn about Agile, Tamidan? Is it is it because of this company, because of certain projects? That's why you actually learn about Agile, or how did you learn about that?
So Agile is something I heard of probably about 5, 6 years ago. So it was around 2017, 2018, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back then, I think it was starting to come to the forefront a little bit, right? Um, but back then I was more accustomed to traditional project management approach, so the waterfall approach, right? Agile, where I truly learned it was in my previous organization, which was in Asia. So I think as many of us would know, AirAsia is not just airlines; they do digital businesses as well, right? So the culture in that company is very much dynamic, very much experimental, very much innovative, right? So it's more of like if we think we can solve a business problem, we roll out the initiative and then we refine it, right? So it's very agile in nature, right? it was a cultural shift for me also, because I come from a very strong planning background. And then with Agile, you need to be accustomed to, incremental release or incrementally doing things, right? So I think that's where I learned it the most, right? So this was probably about 2, 3 years ago, right? And so far, it's one of the companies in Malaysia that I feel truly embodies the mindset of Agile, right? It's just for the benefit of everyone. Agile is not really um, like a reason for not having a project plan. That's not what Agile means, right? Agile has a direction, right? It's just that it's not following the traditional approach of drawing out the plan at the start of day one, and then following it, and then only enjoying the benefit or the output six months later or 9 months later, depending on the length of the project.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Then I have another question because, as we know, Agile is not actually a project management framework or methodology, but there is something which is called Agile project management, right? Which you have mentioned earlier. So, could you
Yep.
explain actually what is Agile project management?
Okay, so Agile, first of all, let me just explain the concept for everyone, right? So Agile is, to me, it's more of a mindset. Yes, you have the tools, you have the enablers, the trackers, and so on, right? But to really be absorbed into Agile project management, it's more of a mindset change, right? Um, to me, Agile project management means that it's incremental release, it's customer focus, it incorporates feedback from the users or the end customers, right? It does not mean that it's lacking of a plan, right? I have to be very clear on that, because there are people that I talk to who say that, oh, we just follow Agile, but actually they just mean that we don't have a plan. We just, go about it and hope for the best, right? That's not what Agile is, right? Um, so I think the main distinction between Agile and Waterfall is that in Agile, it's incremental release. So you do sprint one, right? Then you go into sprint two and so on. In
Mm,
Waterfall, it's more sequential, right? And
mm,
it's it follows a structured path. There's a milestone at every checkpoint and so on, right?
mm,
So to me, the best way to describe it using an example is,
mhm,
let's say now you want to, okay, let's go back a few years when the onset of the COVID pandemic, right?
mm,
So we know that a lot of businesses, especially in food and beverage industry, were impacted, right? People couldn't dine in into restaurants, right?
mm,
They could only rely on takeaway and delivery. So for the restaurants, imagine now you need to build a mobile app, right, to support the takeaway and delivery function, right? If you were to follow a waterfall approach, you probably will get all your requirements that, okay, I need to have good UI UX, I need to have the menu catalog, the payment gateway, I don't know, some loyalty points or something like that. So you probably have like a laundry list of 20 requirements, for example, right?
mm,
And then you will draw out the project plan, and it will take you maybe 3 months to actually launch the mobile app, right? But in Agile, you are very much customer focused, right? So if you take F&B as an example, what does customer focus means? It just means that the customer is able to place the order, pay for the order, and the food gets delivered.
mm,
So the restaurant has that Agile project management mindset, right? The mobile app, so-called version one, right, would be just having those features, right? So your menu catalog, your payment gateway, maybe a tracking, driver tracking feature, so the customer know where the driver is, right? All the other stuff like maybe loyalty points, cashback, whatsoever, that could be part of a second release, right? And maybe those critical requirements or core requirements might take you 6 weeks as opposed to 12 weeks, right? So that means that it's faster to realize the benefit. You can start selling after 6 weeks, right? And you also have the opportunity to do further iteration, right? Maybe your customers might give you feedback that they don't really want loyalty or loyalty points, right? Maybe they just want you to have the discount, more discount, right? I don't need a loyalty card of buy 9 meals free 1 meal, right?
mm.
Maybe I just need you to give me another 5-10% discount. So that might mean that you don't need to spend the effort and the time to build that feature, right? So to me, that's a very good example of implementing Agile in a project setting.
Mm. All right. So, yeah, you have just explained briefly what is agile project management, but do you see agile project management like commonly used in many companies, or they are still, still practicing more of like the waterfall approach when it comes to project management? What is your view on that?
Yep. I think it would so you talk about corporate Malaysia, right? I think it would
Yeah.
depend on the type of industry the company is in, right?
Mm,
So if you talk about e-commerce, talk about digital businesses, technology companies, and all, um, they are starting to use agile, right? But if
mm,
you talk about traditional companies in traditional industries, so you're
mm,
talking about like manufacturing, you're talking about banks, right? You're talking about even retail, for example, right? They still follow the waterfall approach, right?
mm,
Um, and another layer to that is also depends on whether the industry is highly regulated or not. So if you talk about financial institutions, right, there's a
yeah.
lot of regulation from Bank Negara, from Securities Commission, and so on.
Yes.
So what that means is they need to still follow the traditional approach because it gives them a proper planning horizon.
Mm,
It's to assure the regulatory stakeholders that we have a full plan. We have, your risk mitigation, your issue mitigation, right? And it's for compliance purposes, right?
mm.
Uh, so that change might take another few years, right? Um, it's starting to happen, but it's slower compared to certain other industries.
Mm. So right now you're working for the bank.
Yep.
So like you mentioned, because of some of the uh, um like the
Regulatory.
yeah, correct, regulatory things set by the government, which is why they still prefer to use the waterfall approach.
Yep.
I see.
Yes.
But in terms of like IT initiatives, then they will apply the agile approach.
Yes. Also depends on the industry as well, right? So,
Mm, okay. Yeah, then I have another question for you because you did mention that one of the certification that you have is the Prince 2 Agile, right? So
yep.
maybe could you explain what is Prince 2 Agile? Since there are a lot of like we have Scrum, then we
Mm.
have the Scale Agile framework, but then what is Prince 2 Agile? What do they teach in Prince 2 Agile?
Okay. So Prince 2 Agile is fairly recent, right? So it was only
Mm,
introduced in 2015, so it's less than 10 years old,
mm,
right? As opposed to the traditional project management certificate, right? So what you mentioned just now, like Scrum and all those, right? That's also embodied in Prince 2, right? So Prince 2 Agile is not focused on just one technique. So like Scrum, Kanban, and all those are more of techniques or tools,
mm,
right? Prince 2 Agile focuses more on practices and behaviors, right? So they do have, Scrum Master, they do have things like daily stand up, right? Kanban, right? Product backlog, right? So they do introduce all those templates and techniques, right?
mhm.
But broad on a more broader basis, it's mainly on the behaviors, right? So if you were to study Prince to Agile, you will realize that it's more of a mindset change, and they basically give you all these tools, techniques, right? And it's then you are able to tailor it based on the maturity of your organization, right? So it's not very, how to say, prescriptive, meaning like you need to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? It's more of like, okay, we teach you the concept, the mindset, right? The tools, techniques used, right? And then it's really based on your tailoring to your specific project or to your specific company.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So we are now slowly coming to the end of this episode. So before I ask my final question, is there anything, Tarminder, you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah. So I think if I could break it down to very simple terms, right? Agile
Mm,
is more of a few things, right? Number one is working with ambiguity, right? Sometimes, you're launching like a website or mobile app and all, you may not know exactly what the customer wants, right? But you can then slowly do it in iterations, right? Number two is agile is not it's not an excuse or a reason to say that we don't have a plan, right? So that's something I would really like to reiterate, right? That agile is not a substitute for a lack of plan, right? And third also is, and this I tend to see happening, right? companies or projects start off using the traditional waterfall approach, right? And then midway, when they realize that maybe there was an underestimation of effort or some unforeseen issues, right? Timeline, let's say, needs to be extended. But then they suddenly change their strategy to say that instead of doing a full deployment or big bang, they do a phase approach or modular approach, right? And then they'll say that, okay, we shift to an agile approach. That's not agile, right? That just means you have changed your go live strategy, right? If your project started off as a traditional waterfall, right,
Mm-hmm.
and midway you change it to become modular, right? So we do module one, module two, like that in phases. That just means you change your go live strategy. It does not mean you change the methodology of controlling the project, right?
Mm.
Because if you have changed the methodology of controlling the project, then you won't have, the end-to-end project plan. You won't have that governance structure. You know,
Mm.
you will. It's a total revamp, right? So I tend to see that happening quite a lot, right? People say, okay, we follow agile. That's not it, right?
I see. Okay. Then I have the last question for you, Tarminder. Any advice you can share for those who like to learn more about, project management, your expertise, and then also agile?
Okay.
Any advice for them?
Yep. So I think I break it down to two segments for the audience, right? And depending on which one you are, right? So segment one is those who are already in project management, right? So
Mm.
maybe you have been running projects for a few years, right? But maybe you're not certified yet. So I strongly encourage you to look at the options for certifications. So it could be Prince2, it could be PMP, right? Have a sneak peek or preview of their syllabus, the questions, exam questions, and so on, and try to get certified, right? My humble advice is that start off with being certified in the traditional project management, right? Because that is still the bread and butter, right? And you need that strong foundation before you can learn Agile, right?
Mm.
So try to do that, right? And then of course, try to expand your arsenal of projects, right? So whether it's compliance related, whether it's transformation, operational projects, IT projects, whatsoever, right? So that's for segment one, right? Segment two is maybe for those who are in your, I'll say, like traditional departments, HR, finance, right? So let's say now you are a finance manager, right? And your CFO has just given you the unofficial role of a project manager, right? For maybe the replacement of your financial system, right? So my advice would be, maybe at this stage you may not need certification as yet since it's your first project, right? But I would encourage you to read up more on project management, talk
Mm.
to industry experts, mentors. There's a vast knowledge even on LinkedIn, right? Try to pick up the skills and the knowledge, right? And after your first project, if you feel project management is your cup of tea, right, then look into the options for certification, right? Because a lot of us, including myself, started off as so-called accidental project managers, right? Maybe that was never our intention, or maybe we were working a few years in a certain domain, and then we realized, then we got thrown into a project or got assigned a project, and then we realized that, okay, this is more interesting, right? Uh,
Mm.
so then you start taking up certifications on that.
Okay. So with that, we have come to the end of this episode. So thank you so much, Taminder, for joining this Agile Talks. And for those of you, if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to Taminder through LinkedIn. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Taminder. Hope to see you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.